Charlotte Whitmore had traveled nearly 500 miles across the dusty spine of the frontier, and never once had she feared the sky. Storms, after all, were familiar back east, rain that pattered politely on rooftops, thunder that rumbled like distant wagons, wind that behaved itself. But the West did not play by any rules she understood. By late afternoon, the clouds were rolling low and swollen, dark like bruises across the horizon. Her horse grew restless. Dust spiraled along the trail like warning spirits rising from the ground. Charlotte quickened her pace, gripping the reins with shaking fingers. She had planned to reach a ranch before nightfall, a place where she hoped to start a new life far from the man who had tried to claim her. She did not expect violence from the sky itself. The first blast of wind struck her wagon like a fist. Canvas ripped. Wooden crates toppled. The wheels skidded along the loose ground as if possessed. Charlotte fought for control, but the wind only howled louder, faster, harder. A second gust slammed into the wagon and lifted it, actually lifted it, before hurling it onto its side. Charlotte had no time to scream. Her shoulder hit the ground first, then her hip, then her leg crushed beneath the collapsed frame. Dust swallowed her. Sand scraped her eyes. For several terrifying moments she couldn't breathe. Pain radiated from her trapped leg in hot, pulsing waves. She tried to pull free. The wagon didn't budge. Her leg refused to move. Fear crept up her throat, thick and suffocating. There's no one. No one to hear me, she whispered into the storm. The sky answered with a roar. Minutes blurred, whether 3 or 30, she did not know. Her head swam. The world turned soft at the edges. She imagined she might simply fade into the sand if she let. Her eyes close. Then a shadow moved across the chaos. At first, she thought the storm was shaping figures out of dust, phantoms of her imagination. But the shadow grew clearer, sharper, approaching with swift confidence. A tall silhouette, broad-shouldered, wrapped in weather-beaten deerskin, the kind worn by the Apache. Charlotte's breath hitched. A warrior. She had heard stories, whispered in train stations and saloons, of Apache raids, of men who could track a coyote across bare stone, of warriors who moved like smoke and struck like arrows. She had never imagined she would find one standing over her. The storm raging behind him, like a cloak of fury. He crouched beside her without a word. His eyes were the first thing she noticed, dark, steady, assessing her injury with a calmness she didn't expect. His cheekbones were sharp beneath the wind-tangled strands of his hair. He looked carved from the cliffs themselves. "You are trapped," he said, voice low and controlled. Charlotte swallowed hard. Can you help me?" The warrior didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gripped the edge of the overturned wagon, testing its weight. His muscles tensed beneath his leather shirt. Even through pain, Charlotte felt a strange flicker of awe. This man was strength made flesh, but the wagon was too heavy for him to move without injuring her further. He looked back at her leg, pinned awkwardly beneath the frame. His voice softened. "You must lift your legs higher." She blinked through dust. "What?" He met her eyes directly. "If you can lift them just a little, I will pull you free. But if you cannot—" He didn't finish. Charlotte's pulse hammered. Pain ripped through her as she tried to shift her hips. She failed once, twice. Her breath broke in shallow gasps. "You can," he whispered, leaning closer, steady as stone. "Lift your legs higher." Something in his tone, firm, protective, almost commanding, cut through her fear. She obeyed. The instant her leg moved, he reached beneath the wagon with swift precision, sliding his arms around her waist and pulling her up and out with decisive strength. The pain made her cry out, but air rushed back into her lungs in a flood of relief. Free. The wagon crashed down behind them as he dragged. Her clear. Charlotte trembled, dust streaking her face, breath shaking. The warrior lifted her gently as if she weighed nothing. The storm still raged, but she no longer feared it, not with him beside her. Who are you? She whispered. He didn't answer. He simply gathered her into his arms and carried her toward the cliffs, where the storm could not reach. And for the first time since the journey began, Charlotte felt safe. Charlotte had imagined that the West was a place of emptiness, flat land stretching forever under a merciless sky. But as the Apache warrior carried her deeper into the desert, she realized the land held secrets she never could have imagined. The storm still roared above them, but under the cliffs its fury softened. Rain became mist. Wind became a distant growl. The warrior's footsteps were sure and silent as he navigated a narrow path carved through red stone. Charlotte clung to him weakly, the pain in her leg throbbing with each movement. But his grip was steady, anchoring her to consciousness. You didn't have to save me, she whispered at one point, her head resting against his shoulder. He didn't look down at her. A life in danger calls for action. Not exactly warm words. Yet his arms held her securely, carefully, as if she were something precious. He carried her through a winding crevice that opened suddenly into a hidden canyon, protected on all sides by towering rock walls. A small pool shimmered at its center, fed by a thin waterfall that whispered gently against stone. High branches offered shade. Wild herbs grew in green clusters along the edges, so many colors. So much life tucked away where no one from her world would ever think to look. Charlotte gasped softly. This place, it feels like another world. It is unseen by most, the warrior replied. Safe from the storm. Safe. The words settled around her like a blanket. He lowered her carefully onto a bed of soft earth near the pool. For a moment she felt the loss of his warmth, like stepping away from a fire. He knelt beside her injured leg, his expression sharpening with focus. Your leg is twisted, swollen. His fingers hovered above her skin, respectful but observant. You cannot walk. Charlotte bit her lip. Will I recover? His eyes lifted to hers, dark, steady, unwavering. If you allow me to tend to you, yes. Something in her chest eased. Then, please. The warrior stood and walked to the edge of the canyon, gathering herbs with swift precision. She watched him, mesmerized by the way he moved, quiet, controlled, confident in every motion. There was nothing careless about him. Nothing uncertain. When he returned, he knelt again and crushed the herbs into a paste using a smooth river stone. The scent was sharp and earthy, like pine and smoke. He dipped his fingers into the mixture and looked at her. This will hurt. Charlotte nodded, bracing herself. He applied the poultice gently but firmly. Pain shot up her leg and her breath caught, tears stinging her eyes. But then the pain softened, cooled, eased under his touch. You are strong, he murmured. The words surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had said that to her, not honestly, not with respect. The men back east had called her delicate, breakable, as if she were a porcelain doll whose only purpose was to be owned and displayed. This warrior saw something else in her. When he finished wrapping her leg with strips of soft deer hide, he sat back on his heels. For the first time, she noticed he was breathing hard, not from exertion, she sensed, but from holding back something. Emotion? Concern? Or simply the weight of responsibility? Thank you, she whispered. He studied her for a long moment. Most would not thank an Apache, he said quietly. Not in your world. Charlotte swallowed. Then my world has been wrong. His gaze flickered, something like surprise, something like acceptance, but he said nothing. Instead, he rose and moved to start a small fire near the canyon wall, sheltered from the rain. Sparks danced into warmth, illuminating his profile in shifting amber light. For the first time she saw him not as a rescuer, not as a warrior looming above her, but as a man solitary, burdened, and unexpectedly kind. What should I call you?" she asked softly. He paused, then answered simply, "Dakota." The name rolled off her tongue like a secret. Dakota. He looked at her then fully, deeply, without the guarded distance from before. The fire reflected in his eyes, making them glow like polished obsidian. "You should rest," he said. "Your body must heal. And you?" she asked. "Will you stay here?" Dakota nodded once. "I will not leave you." A strange warmth unfurled in her chest. Protected, safe, not alone. As the storm faded into distant thunder, Charlotte drifted into sleep with Dakota's silhouette beside the fire, the silent guardian of a world she never knew existed. Charlotte woke to the scent of smoke and wild sage, her cheek resting against a smooth hide blanket Dakota had placed beneath her. Dawn filtered into the hidden canyon through a narrow gap high above, casting pale gold across the pool. For a moment she didn't remember the storm, the fall, or the pain, only the quiet hush of water and the distant crackle of fire. Then she saw Dakota. He sat on a ledge just beyond the fire, his back straight, his legs crossed, his long hair tied with a strip of leather. He wasn't watching her, but watching everything else, the canyon entrance, the shadowed corners, the sky above. A sentinel, a protector, a man who carried solitude like a second skin. He noticed her waking before she even spoke. "Your leg?" he asked, looking at her with that sharp, steady gaze. "Sore," she answered truthfully. "But better, I think." He nodded once, as if that was acceptable. "You must not put weight on it." "I won't," she promised. Dakota brought her a small wooden bowl filled with broth made from roots and herbs. She thanked him, and he simply inclined his head. He watched her sip, not with suspicion, but with a quiet attentiveness she didn't understand. She felt suddenly self-conscious. "You don't have to keep doing this." "I told you," he replied. "I will not leave you while you cannot walk." "But why?" she asked softly. He hesitated. The silence that followed wasn't cold, it was heavy, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "You were alone," he finally said, "and in danger." A warrior does not ignore that. Charlotte felt warmth spread through her chest. Gratitude, relief, something deeper she didn't dare name yet. Still, she sensed there was more. Dakota had helped her, yes, but not blindly. There was a reason he had been out in the storm. There was a reason he had chosen to risk himself for her. "What were you doing out there?" she asked quietly, watching his face. "You weren't just traveling." Dakota's jaw tightened slightly. He looked toward the canyon's opening, as if the answer waited somewhere beyond the stone. "I hunt," he said. "I scout. I watch those who come into our lands." Our lands. The words were not possessive, they were protective. "You mean white settlers?" she asked, her voice careful. "All who cross." He corrected. She realized then that Dakota lived between worlds, one of warriors and tradition, and one of strangers who entered their territory with guns, fear, and judgment. A heavy burden for one man to carry. Charlotte felt her heart ache for him in a way she didn't expect. Dakota didn't reveal more. So she turned to the only truth she owned her past. "You saved me from the storm," she murmured, staring into the fire. "But I wasn't just traveling alone by choice." He said nothing, but she could feel his attention sharpen. "I was meant to be married," she admitted, "to a man I didn't choose." Her fingers tightened around the wooden bowl. "He said I owed him, that I was his property because he'd paid my father debts. And he said," her voice wavered. She swallowed, fighting the tremor. Dakota spoke softly, "He hurt you." It wasn't a question. It was an understanding. Charlotte nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "He told me he'd find me no matter where I went. That running would make things worse. That my fear made him stronger." Dakota's expression changed, not wildly, not visibly, but dangerously quiet, protective. A heat flickered in his gaze like fire under stone. "No man owns another person," he said, each word carved from steel. Charlotte breathed shakily. "I didn't know where to go. I just rode west. I thought maybe out here I could disappear. Start over." Dakota's eyes moved to her injured leg. "You should not have traveled alone." "I know," she whispered, "but I had no one." For the first time, she saw emotion break through the warrior's calm mask, a flicker of something like regret. Not for what he had done, but for what she had suffered. "You are not alone here," he said. The words struck her like a warm wind. Before she could respond, Dakota shifted closer, examining her leg with gentle precision. His hands were warm, steady, reverent. When she winced, he murmured softly, not commandingly this time, but encouragingly, "You are strong. Lift your legs higher." The phrase that had saved her life now carried a new weight, a new intimacy. Not obedience-trust. Charlotte lifted her legs slightly, enough for him to rewrap the hide. The pain was there, yes, but duller than before. His touch was careful, almost tender. "You heal," he said quietly. "Every day your strength returns." Charlotte looked at him through soft tears. "Do you always speak like that?" He met her eyes. "Like what?" "As if you see more in me than I see in myself." Dakota didn't blink. "Perhaps I do." Her chest tightened. His burdens were still hidden, his past still unspoken. But Charlotte felt the connection forming fragile. Dangerous, impossible to ignore. And in that hidden canyon, something in both of them had begun to change. By the fourth morning in the hidden canyon, Charlotte had grown used to waking before Dakota returned from his early patrol. He always left silently, vanishing into the dawn like a shadow woven from the land itself, and returned with herbs, water, or game. He never said where he went or what he watched. But Charlotte sensed that danger of some kind was never far, that morning. However, he didn't return. Not right away. Charlotte sat upright, her heart thudding. The canyon was unusually still. No distant footfalls, no rustle of brush, no sign of his silhouette emerging between the stones. She tried to stand, but her legs screamed in protest, forcing her back down. "Dakota?" she called softly. Silence answered. Panic started to curl inside her chest. She had known him only days. Yet the thought of being alone in the open, helpless on the ground, filled her with a fear far sharper than any she had expected. Then she heard it faint at first, then growing clearer. Voices. Not Dakota's deep, quiet tone. These were sharper, harsher, multiple. Charlotte stiffened, turning her head toward the narrow entrance of the canyon. 3 Apache warriors stepped into view, her breath caught. They were dressed like Dakota leather leggings, chest pieces, eagle feathers braided into long black hair, but their faces carried suspicion, not calm. Their eyes swept the canyon rapidly, noting the fire pit, the water, the herbs. And finally one of them muttered something in Apache under his breath. Charlotte instinctively tried to back away, but the movement sent pain shooting up her leg. She gasped. The tallest warrior stepped forward. He looked older than Dakota, more hardened, with a scar running down the left side of his jaw. His voice was low, rough, and authoritative. "You are the woman," he said in accented English. Charlotte swallowed. "Dakota, he helped me. My wagon overturned." "I didn't mean to trespass, please. I'm just trying to survive." The warriors exchanged glances. The tallest one stepped even closer. "You lie," he said coldly. "You were brought here, against our ways, into a sacred place." I didn't know," Charlotte stammered. "He saved my life. I didn't ask him to break any rules." Another warrior leaned down and inspected her leg, noting the herbs, the bandaging, the unmistakable touch of Apache healing. He treats her like family, the warrior muttered in his own tongue. The leader's eyes tightened. Like something else. The implications made Charlotte's heartbeat thunder. At that moment, footsteps echoed at the canyon entrance. Dakota emerged. His expression changed the instant he saw the scene, his jaw tightening, shoulders straightening, his entire body coiling with protective tension. He strode toward Charlotte and placed himself between her and the three warriors. Enough, Dakota said sharply in Apache. The leader stepped forward with bristling authority. The resemblance between the two men became clearer now, the same high cheekbones, the same storm-dark eyes. Brothers. Dakota, the leader growled. What have you done? Dakota didn't flinch. I saved her. You brought an outsider into this canyon. The older brother snapped. Into a place not meant for her eyes. You risk the tribe. You risk war. She was dying, Dakota countered, calm but unyielding. She is not one of us, the brother shot back. You know the rules. Charlotte watched, breath frozen, as the two men stared each other down. It wasn't anger alone, it was something deeper. A clash of duty and blood, loyalty and instinct. The older brother's gaze flicked to Charlotte. She cannot stay. Dakota stepped in front of her, blocking the brother's line of sight. She is under my protection. The canyon fell silent. Charlotte felt her breath catch. She saw the way Dakota planted himself like an unmovable pillar, as if her life depended on his stance alone. The brother's eyes narrowed dangerously. Then you will answer for her. When the chief hears of this, there will be consequences. Dakota's expression didn't change. I accept them. The warriors exchanged grim looks. One of them muttered, he risks everything for her. Another answered, foolish. Or something worse. Dakota turned slightly, just enough to glance down at Charlotte. His expression softened only for her. Briefly, just long enough for her to feel the wordless promise in his eyes. I will not let them take you. The moment passed as quickly as it came. The older brother spoke again, voice heavy with warning. We return at sunset. Decide what you will do by then. The three warriors left as suddenly as they had arrived, disappearing through the canyon's narrow throat like specters. When they were finally gone, Charlotte exhaled shakily. Dakota knelt before her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath. They will not harm you, he said quietly. Not while I breathe. Dakota. Her voice trembled. Did I cause trouble for you? His eyes held hers, unwavering, intense. You did nothing. It is I who made the choice. What choice? The choice, The canyon grew quiet after the warrior's departure, but the tension lingered in the air like a tangible weight. Charlotte lay against a rock, her leg throbbing, as Dakota moved silently to the edge of the pool, scanning the shadows. The distant cliffs hid the approaching sun, and the canyon already carried the chill of early evening. Charlotte felt fear twist in her chest. The older warriors had threatened their return, and she knew that, for Dakota, the choice to protect her was more than a risk, it was rebellion. And yet, despite the danger, she sensed his unwavering resolve, a protective fire that would not be denied. I should move you to a safer place, Dakota said softly, breaking the quiet. His eyes, dark and stormy, met hers. Somewhere they cannot reach. Charlotte's heart raced. The thought of leaving this hidden sanctuary, the only place she had felt even slightly safe, was terrifying. Yet she trusted him. Always she trusted him. How far? She asked. He hesitated. We travel at night. The land is open, and I will guide you. But, he paused, a shadow crossing his face. I cannot carry you forever. Charlotte swallowed. fear and determination battling inside her. "Then I will walk," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "even if it hurts." Dakota studied her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes, revealing something fierce beneath the calm exterior. Finally, he nodded. "Then we leave after sunset." Hours crawled by. Charlotte rested, feeling each throb of her leg as if the pain itself were a warning. Dakota prepared their small provisions: water, dried meat, and the herbs that would soothe her injury. All the while, his movements were precise, almost ritualistic. Charlotte watched, fascinated by the care with which he handled everything. There was something in him that demanded order, that drew life from chaos. Yet all of it was devoted to protecting her Dot. As night fell, the canyon transformed. Shadows lengthened, blending into one another. Stars appeared above, piercing the darkness with cold light. Charlotte tried to stand, but her leg buckled beneath her. Pain exploded, sharp and unyielding, and she cried out, helpless. Dakota was immediately at her side. Without a word, he knelt and gathered her in his arms, lifting her with the strength that had first saved her life. She pressed herself against him, almost instinctively, feeling his chest beneath her cheek. Her heart raced not from fear, but from the proximity of him, the warmth, the unspoken protection in every line of his body. "You must trust me," he whispered. His voice was steady, commanding, yet intimate. "I will not let harm come to you." "I do," she whispered back, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I trust you completely." He held her close, walking toward the trail that would lead them out of the canyon. Charlotte clung to him, every step sending pain through her leg, but she refused to let go. Somewhere in the dark, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, she realized that she did not want to be anywhere else. She had no fear of the dangers that lay ahead, only the terror of losing his presence beside her. The first arrow whistled past their heads, striking the ground with a harsh thud. Charlotte screamed, pressing herself closer to Dakota, who shielded her instinctively. Another arrow followed, then another. The older warriors had tracked them, moving like shadows along the ridge above. Dakota adjusted his hold on her, whispering, "Stay low." "Hold on." Charlotte wrapped her arms around his neck, the shock and adrenaline mixing with something more, a warmth, an awareness of the closeness they could not deny. Her body was weak, yet her courage burned brighter than ever. She would not falter. Not now. Not with him. They pressed forward, Dakota's body a solid, unyielding wall between her and danger. Each step was perilous, yet the trust Charlotte felt in him was absolute. She obeyed without hesitation when he guided her, adjusted her position, and whispered directions in the dark. Every command was an act of care, every movement a silent promise that she was safe. Finally, they reached a narrow river crossing. Water roared against the rocks, cold and unforgiving. Arrows continued to strike around them, but Dakota guided the horse into the current, letting it surge beneath them with practiced precision. Charlotte clung to him, heart pounding, knowing that she would never forget this night, not the terror, not the danger, and certainly not the man who had become her anchor in a world that had once seemed cruel and indifferent. When they reached the far bank, Dakota set her down gently. Their eyes met hers wide with fear, awe, and gratitude. His storm-dark, fierce, protective. "You survived," he said simply. "And so did you," she whispered. Her voice trembling in that moment. Charlotte understood the truth of his whispered command days earlier. "Lift your legs higher." It had been about trust, obedience, courage, and now, in the darkness, she realized that following him had become a choice. That defined everything that was to come. The night was deep and black, the kind of darkness that swallowed the desert whole. Stars flickered above like distant fires, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. Dakota's hand never left Charlotte's back as he guided her horse along the rugged, jagged terrain. Every sense in his body was alert, ears attuned to the slightest crack of a branch, eyes scanning shadows for movement, muscles coiled for immediate action. Behind them, the distant silhouette of 3 Apache warriors haunted the ridges. Relentless in pursuit, Charlotte clung to Dakota with a mixture of fear and trust. Her leg throbbed painfully, but she refused to let it slow them. The journey was grueling, and each step tested her strength. Yet every time she faltered, Dakota's steady hand and quiet encouragement reminded her why she had obeyed him from the very first moment. "Lift your legs higher." The words, once literal, now carried a weight of endurance, courage, and survival. "Hold steady," Dakota whispered, his voice low but firm. "The ridge ahead is sharp. Keep your balance." Charlotte pressed herself against him, feeling his pulse under her cheek, the warmth of his body like a tether to safety. She nodded, letting his instructions guide her, knowing that hesitation could cost them both. Behind them, the pursuers' shadows moved silently, like dark wraiths along the rocky horizon. They had been careful enough to follow without detection, but Dakota was careful still, taking the high ground whenever possible and using every natural contour to their advantage. The desert around them was merciless. Jagged stones tore at the horses' hooves, dry sand clung to their legs, and the wind carried sharp gusts that stung exposed skin. Charlotte's lungs burned as she struggled to breathe through the exertion, yet the terror of capture pushed her forward. Each step reminded her that her life now depended entirely on Dakota, and that his own survival was intertwined with hers. At the base of a canyon wall, they paused briefly. Dakota's eyes swept the horizon, calculating their next move. "We need to cross the river," he said, his voice almost a whisper, blending with the rush of water. "It's the only way to shake them." Charlotte's stomach sank. The river was wide and swift, swollen from the storm days earlier. But Dakota's confidence was unwavering, his strength and skill evident in every deliberate movement. "We can do this," he said, reading her fear. "Stay close. Hold tight." She wrapped her arms around him instinctively, letting her body press against his. His hands guided her, steadying the horse, positioning her for balance. The icy current struck their legs as the horse plunged in. Arrows whistled past, striking the water with deadly precision. Charlotte screamed once, instinctively pressing closer to Dakota, but he moved like a wall, deflecting danger with calm control. Every instinct, every skill honed over years protected her. Halfway across, the horse stumbled on a hidden stone, throwing Charlotte forward. She landed against Dakota, pain shooting through her leg. Yet, despite her agony, she felt a strange surge of courage because he had her. His hands were firm, his grip unyielding, his presence unwavering. She realized then that the trust she had given him days ago was no longer tentative, it was absolute. They reached the far bank, breath heaving, clothes soaked, hearts racing. The shadows of their pursuers flickered on the opposite side of the river, frustrated by the current's obstacle. Dakota assessed the scene, calculating the distance, the terrain, and the next move. Charlotte, still pressed against him, looked up at his storm-dark eyes and saw something deeper than focus. Relief, fierce protection. And something else, an unspoken connection neither could deny. "You did well," he said quietly, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "Your courage kept us alive." Charlotte's chest tightened. She had survived not only because of him, but because she had followed him, trusted him through the desert and the storm. And in that trust, in that obedience that had once seemed like necessity, she found strength she had never known she possessed. The night stretched before them, full of danger and uncertainty, but Charlotte understood something vital. As long as she stayed with Dakota, as long as she obeyed him not out of fear but out of trust. They would endure whatever the desert and their enemies threw at them. And in the silent, starlit expanse, their bond deepened, unspoken but undeniable. The desert night was alive with danger. Even after crossing the swollen river, the pursuit did not relent. Dakota led Charlotte through narrow gullies and jagged ridges, their horse moving cautiously but swiftly. Every shadow seemed to hold movement, every distant sound a threat. Charlotte clung to him, trusting him implicitly. Yet the fear she had carried for days now mixed with something deeper, a burgeoning awareness of how much she depended on him, and how much she cared. Then the unexpected happened. An arrow struck Dakota's arm as he steered the horse along a narrow ledge. The weapon glanced off his leather jerkin, slicing the flesh beneath. He cried out sharply, a rare break in his stoic demeanor, and the horse reared. Charlotte screamed, pressing herself against him instinctively as he regained control. Blood darkened the sleeve of his shirt, and pain twisted his features into something Charlotte had never seen: vulnerability. "Dakota!" she cried, her voice trembling. He steadied himself, shaking his head. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice carried strain. "Keep moving." The pursuing warriors were close now. Charlotte could see their silhouettes tracing the ridges, arrows gleaming in the starlight. Her fear flared, but she refused to panic. Dakota's calm strength anchored her, even as blood seeped from his arm and the horse faltered over the rough terrain. Finally, he threw himself from the horse and dropped to one knee, shielding her behind him. "Go," he commanded, voice sharp. "Run, I'll slow them." Charlotte froze, terror gripping her chest. "No, I'm not leaving you," she cried. "You must." He shouted, grimacing from the pain. "You can survive without me, but they'll never stop if you don't." Her mind raced. She could feel the pulse of his life, the heat of his body, the firmness of his presence. Even now, he was shielding her. Yet he was human, vulnerable, injured, and she realized something she hadn't before. She could not simply let him fight alone. "Dakota!" She shouted again, forcing her courage to the surface. "I won't leave you." He looked at her, storm-dark eyes flashing with both surprise and admiration. "Then help me." In that instant, the dynamic shifted. Charlotte, the woman who had once been helpless and dependent, now became a force of will. She pressed against him, helping him stabilize the horse and pulling from her belt the spare bandages Dakota had prepared for her leg. Together, they tended to his bleeding arm. Her hands were clumsy, trembling from fear, but Dakota guided her, instructing gently, yet insisting she act. "Hold the pressure here," he said. "Steady, steady." Charlotte did as he instructed, the warmth of his hand brushing hers, the urgency of the moment sharpening her focus. Each beat of his pulse under her fingers became a lifeline. The connection they had forged through fear, trust, and silent obedience deepened in that shared struggle. The pursuing warriors arrived at the ridge above, scanning the terrain. Dakota's arm throbbed, but he moved to position the horse in a defensive stance, using the slope to advantage. Charlotte's courage surged. She whispered instructions to him, and when he faltered, she reinforced them. Together, they became a single, unbreakable unit. By the time the arrows slowed and the warriors were forced to retreat, Dakota leaned heavily against Charlotte, breathing hard, but alive. She pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow under her touch. "You saved me," he said finally, voice low and rough. "No," Charlotte replied, eyes bright in the moonlight. "We saved each other." He studied her, the shadows and firelight dancing across his face. There was gratitude, pride, and something more. Something dangerous and undeniable, an intimacy born of shared survival, of trust and courage intertwined. Charlotte felt it too. The undeniable pull between them, made stronger by fear and the night's trials. For the first time, she realized that bravery was not just following him blindly, it was standing beside him, saving him in return. And in that quiet, tense desert night, with danger still lurking but momentarily held at bay, Charlotte understood that she and Dakota had crossed a threshold. Neither would ever be the same, and their bond, tested in fire and blood, was unbreakable. The first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the desert, brushing the jagged cliffs in soft gold. Charlotte and Dakota had traveled through the night, evading the persistent pursuit of the older warriors. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, their muscles burning from the treacherous terrain. But the danger that had haunted them all night had finally begun to recede. For the first time, Charlotte allowed herself a long, shuddering breath. Dakota led her into a narrow canyon, smaller and more hidden than any she had seen before. The air was cool, scented with pine and damp earth from a distant spring. He lowered her gently to the ground, brushing dust from her clothes, and examined her leg, now swollen but healing. "You have done well," he said softly. "Your strength carries us both." Charlotte smiled faintly, leaning into him. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." He did not reply immediately, but his gaze softened, dark eyes reflecting the morning light. He had fought not just the terrain and the pursuing warriors, but his own fears, his own sense of duty to protect her. And in doing so, he had revealed a part of himself few would ever see: a man capable of fierce love and unwavering loyalty. The sound of footsteps echoed through the canyon. Charlotte stiffened, heart racing. She feared that the older warriors had caught up, but instead of hostile voices, a calmer, more measured tone spoke. "Dakota," said the elder brother's voice, tinged with caution rather than anger. "We followed, and we saw." Dakota stepped forward, blocking Charlotte instinctively. "And what did you see?" "Her courage," the older man said, his voice softer than before. "And your choice to protect her. We understand now." Charlotte's pulse quickened. The tension that had haunted the past days, the fear that the tribe would force them apart, finally eased. The warriors approached, nodding in respect rather than accusation. The elder brother's eyes softened as he glanced at Charlotte. "She is not a threat," he said simply. Dakota relaxed slightly, though his eyes never left Charlotte's. "She is under my protection," he said, the words carrying a promise that had been tested in fire, blood, and peril. The elder nodded. "Then we honor that." Charlotte exhaled, relief flooding her body. The immediate threat was gone. For the first time since the storm had overturned her wagon, she felt she could breathe freely. Yet she realized that this freedom was not simply about escape, it was about choice. Dakota had given her protection, but the final decision rested with her. She stepped closer, brushing her hand against his. "Dakota, what now?" she asked quietly, her voice tinged with both exhaustion and hope. He studied her, storm-dark eyes meeting hers with intensity. "Now you decide. You can return to your world, or you can stay with me. Your life is yours to choose." Charlotte looked around the hidden canyon, the place that had become a sanctuary, and then back at him. Her leg throbbed, her body was bruised and weary, but her spirit felt unbreakable. She had survived storms, pursuit, and fear, and she had done so with him, not for him, but alongside him. "I stay," she whispered finally, the words carrying the weight of both determination and relief. "Not because I must, but because I choose to." Dakota's expression softened, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "Then we walk forward together," he said. Charlotte lifted her eyes to the horizon. The sun was rising fully now, painting the desert in gold and amber. The danger that had seemed insurmountable now felt like a distant memory, and ahead lay endless possibilities. She was not alone. She had a companion, a protector, and perhaps in time, something deeper love. Dakota offered his hand, and she took it without hesitation. Together they stepped into the open desert, side by side, strong and unbroken. Every obstacle they had faced had forged a bond that could not be undone, a bond of trust. Courage and mutual respect as they walked. Charlotte realized something profound. Freedom was not just the absence of danger, but the presence of choice and the strength to follow one's heart. And for the first time in her life, she knew she was truly free. Dakota glanced at her, a flicker of warmth in his dark eyes. "You walk with me," he said. "I do," she replied, matching his pace, her voice steady. "Always." And together they disappeared into the morning light, a warrior and the woman who had learned to trust, to fight, and to love, side by side, ready to face whatever the world might hold.